Hi, my name's Anna Serin, and I'm Director of Listings Development with the Canadian Securities Exchange. And you're joining us here on Friday, October 1st, 2021, for another market recap. I am, of course, joined by my wonderful co-host, Bruce Campbell with StoneCastle Investment Management. Thank you for joining me, Bruce.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Start of Q4 here.
It's October. I can't believe it. It's amazing. Yes, Q4. Okay, there's a lot that happened this week we're going to break down. We're going to talk about a market sell-off that happened this week. There's a bunch of reasons why that happened and a bunch of things that happened after the fact. And we're going to talk about seasonality again. We're going to get into something interesting that happened on the Tehran Stock Exchange and the CEO having to do a resignation. And then, of course, we're going to get into some CSE issuer news. So let's start off with what happened this week on the market sell-off.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of volatility this week, and there was, kind of a number of different factors that came to play for, why that was. So, starting with obviously a bit of seasonality, which we'll touch on. September tends to be, weak time. You started to see, the Fed come out and talk about inflation. And in the past, they've been talking about it being, transitory. But now they're sort of saying, well, no, it seems like there's more inflation than we actually thought, and it's going to stick around a lot longer. And so that immediately caused, the market to go, inflation, which, caused bonds to sell off and yields to rise, the US dollar to rise. At the same time, you saw, some Fed people have to step down for a number of different trading issues, and then you sort of throw on top of that the time of year and the fact that people are probably a little bit more spooked, and then the market was in full downswing for sure. So we had fairly big down days yesterday for sure.
I feel like we've talked about this a lot. The market has reacted a bunch to inflation fears. We keep having inflation fears at some point. Does that change at some point when rates start to change, or do we just keep having these reactions?
Well, I mean, I think that's, the market doesn't want to believe that there's inflation. And I mean, obviously that was the message of the Fed, that, the inflation it's just temporary. It's going to go away, as soon as we get, kind of everything back to normal. But everything hasn't got back to normal, right? So, I mean, obviously you saw the spike in COVID numbers through, July, August, and the first part of September. And, that had an impact where it didn't allow supply chains to open up, and then things became tight. At the same time, you are seeing the global economy pick up. So, there's commodities that continue to accelerate. And so as a result, you are seeing inflation. I mean, if you look at, probably your monthly budget or my monthly budget, things cost more than they did a year ago. If that's, there's a study out on bacon there, if you look at gasoline, it doesn't matter where you turn, it's more expensive. And so that inflation is real, but the market maybe doesn't necessarily want to believe it. And now, they're kind of forced to, and that has, when it sort of doesn't matter, as things are kind of moving, and then all of a sudden, all at once, it does matter. This is what happens. And we saw that exactly this week.
Crazy. Okay. As a result of this sell-off, there was some sectors that outperformed and some sectors that underperformed. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we were really interested in kind of what we saw under the surface, because when there's a sell-off, it's kind of like, panic, everyone's mass hysteria running for the exit. But it's always interesting to see what the underlying is doing. And so one of the things that you always expect, maybe not always, but you certainly would expect, is that when markets sell off, investors go to more defensive areas. Those tend to be utilities and consumer staples. Those are two areas that, sort of thick and thin in bear markets, they will outperform. Doesn't mean that they don't go down, but they maybe go down less. Well, in this case, they weren't. The utilities, which you would have expected, had a little stronger performance, but not at all. And consumer staples got, continued to get beat up yesterday quite dramatically, which was a little bit surprising, because, a lot of people are painting the narrative that we're going to start this new bear market. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case here, because you weren't seeing that under the surface. And then the second thing that we started to see was we saw this outperformance of small caps to the large caps. And so throughout this year, we've really seen we've seen the large caps perform a lot stronger than the small caps since probably about the May timeframe. We've seen that outperformance. And what you can see here on the chart that's up is we just took a look at, what's happened in the last 10 days. And so you can see that the small caps have outperformed the large caps, both in Toronto and in New York. And so that's telling you that, maybe things aren't quite as dire as the market thought this week, and that, we're going through a correction where people are scared and spooked, but the underlying economy, the underlying market is actually starting to improve. So those were two things that we were looking at that we were really interested in, because we think that has a bearing on this being just a correction versus it being the start of a new bear market.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right. People will seek safety when they're fear of what's going on in the markets, but they're not necessarily seeking safety. Is that essentially what you're saying?
That's exactly it. Yeah, I mean, they're looking for for other areas that are going to perform, and what we could see is this is just strictly a seasonality. It's probably a little bit of window dressing, because at the end of the quarter, a lot of different portfolio managers have to report their holdings, and they don't want to be showing holding this or that. And so, they reposition everything. Obviously, with what's happened with interest rates, that's caused a repositioning. So, as rates go up, bond prices go down. And so there would be a rebalancing that had to occur. So, there's a number of factors that are at play. And I mean, obviously today it's still kind of at play, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks, especially with where we're headed with seasonality.
Right. And on that note, you're going to tell us about seasonality. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously touched on this the last, several weeks here, basically talking about the fact that, from around call it the 15th, I think it's actually the 17th of September, to around the first week of October, seasonality tends to be the weakest. So if you go back in history, that's when things are the weakest. This chart here is actually quite interesting. The guys from All Star Charts put this together, and it's looking at three different factors that all, they all have some seasonality or year-end bias. And what they found is that basically the market, as we suspected, bottoms right around this first part of October, and then, has a great move after that. So, there's obviously this strong seasonality effect. We're coming through just the end of it now. So what we want to see over the next week is how the market responds. We've already seen how it responded with different sectors. So the small caps versus large caps, the utilities and consumer staples versus, say, energy and materials. So that's the first sign. The next will be, how it starts to respond going forward here.
Wow, interesting. Well, we've learned a lot about seasonality over the past few months, so it'll be interesting to see that play out. Okay, our next story is an interesting one. The Tehran Stock Exchange, so the TSE, recently had its CEO have to step down. The reason for this was regulators found a hidden Bitcoin mining facility in the basement of the bourse, which is quite interesting. Just to give you a little backstory here, back in May, the Iranian president banned mining for Bitcoin for the period of the summer. We're starting to see this trend happening in certain countries that are having a bit of an energy crisis. And so they've banned that. Well, it was, and they've raided a bunch of homes, they've raided empty factories, and then they raided the Tehran Stock Exchange and found it going on in the basement. The Tehran Stock Exchange said, no, this is just for research that we're using all these computers. Obviously not. And he had to step down. Do you think this is something that we're going to continue to see, just kind of the energy requirements for Bitcoin mining? Are we going to continue to see government interject into the ability to mine?
Well, it certainly seems like that's a trend. If you look at what China just recently has done with cryptocurrency, obviously, there's countries that are banning it because of the power usage that happens and the energy requirements to fulfill that. Some of the public companies that are out there that are mining, they're all looking for alternatives. So I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. Obviously, there's a huge arm wrestling match going on with, crypto. Is it going to last? Is it not going to last? my personal view is that, it'll be around and will last. But, it seems like there's a lot of different authorities that are trying to regulate it, and they're, sort of playing catch up here to a certain degree. So it'll be interesting what happens from the pure regulatory standpoint over the next few years.
It looks like on the forefront of a lot of people. Can you see me? Am I here?
I can, yeah. It looked like you froze up there for a minute.
I did. My Wi-Fi is crazy these days. Okay, so moving along, we're going to talk about CSE issuer news. I'm going to talk everything psychedelic today. We had a few movers and shakers. Before I get into that, I will mention that we've had a bunch of exploration companies that have come to list on the CSE. It's kind of nice to see that sector back and alive, and lots of new companies coming to us. I think we had 5 in September alone. So yay for the mining sector. We'll talk more about that another week. Psychedelics, we had a private placement closement for one of our issuers, a Pharmather. They closed a $10 million private placement. And this is intended to be used for the advancement of a microneedle patch program for a ketamine product, as well as clinical stage psychedelic biotech that they're working on. So congratulations to them. I thought this was an interesting financing because it was done by H.C. Wainwright. It's an investment bank in the US. Do you know that name? I do, yeah. I've noticed that name on a lot of private placements recently. And when I looked them up, I thought it was really interesting because they're a pretty, they're a legacy investment bank in the US, but they are investing in so much psychedelics, blockchain companies, as well as cryptocurrency. I'm seeing a huge amount of investment within that space. And so I thought it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of this US money come from an institution like that into these emerging sectors. Are you seeing that trend? Well, certainly there's pockets of it. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, everyone's looking for what's next and what's going to be, the area to generate return. And I mean, these guys have obviously built a part of their business on, being involved, and obviously the financing, and it shows that they must have clients that are interested in that area. Well, it's great to see. Okay, and we have another new listing that came to market this week. This company is called Love Pharma, or Love Farm. I'm sorry, Love Farm. They just listed on the CSE. This is the first one I've seen of its kind. It is in the psychedelic sector, but it is focused on sexual health and well-being and wellness around that. They will be involved in research and development, and they will have products that they sell, as well as kind of exploring this opportunity of the well-being of sexual health for people using psychedelics. So this is the first one I've seen of this. I feel like we're going to see more of it. Yeah, it could possibly be a trend. I know in cannabis there has been, quite a bit of that type of product that's showing up, kind of over the last 10 years. I noticed that one of their products actually was a CBD product as well. So it's interesting. I do love this movement towards mental health. Now it'll be sexual health and well-being. So we'll see where it goes from there. So congratulations to those guys. Welcome to the CSE family. Excited to see what's going to happen next for them. Bruce, what should we think about going into next week? Well, the biggest things that we're watching, obviously, we talked a little bit a moment ago about the correction and how the market responds from that. But going forward, we're going to start to see earnings releases, especially in the US. So, that's going to be important to see what effect this, ramp up in the COVID Delta had to numbers and where companies are. So that's going to be important. And then obviously interest rates in the dollar in the US are also, going to play a pretty key role here. Do things settle down? Do they, keep bouncing around, and what impact that has on the market? So those are the the things that we have our eye on. Absolutely. The other thing I want to note is next week, the CSE will be very busy online. We have on Monday and Tuesday, October 4th and 5th, we will be hosting an ESG event. All the information can be found on our website. And on Wednesday, we'll be hosting digital securities in the capital markets. Everything can be found on our website. Make sure that you check it out and register and join us. All 3 days will be super informational. So make sure you check it out. Thank you so much, Bruce. Look forward to seeing you next week. Yeah, see you next week.